Once I got home, I walked into the house and found my younger sister, Colleen, sitting on the couch in the living room. I looked at her to see what she was doing. I saw a book in her hand, but I couldn't recognize the cover. Then I got closer to being able to read its name. I walked across the room, grabbed it, and threw it at the wall. Colleen looked at me and started sobbing. I rolled my eyes and asked, "What is wrong?" Colleen looked down at her feet with swollen eyes as she stopped crying and said, "You took away my book." I let out a breath as I ran a hand across my face and said, "You're mad at me because of a damn book." She nodded in affirmative while wiping away the remaining tears from her eyes. I dropped my head as I picked up the book and gave it back to her and asked why. Colleen looked up with tears in her eyes and said, "You took my book." I sighed, dropped my head, and looked towards my feet. I tilted my head to the side and said, "God, why do you like this book so much?" Colleen smiled and said, "I want to sparkle like they do." Okay, now I need to introduce you to Colleen. She is my sister who was born a few years after me. She is 10 years old. Colleen was born with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a brown ring around her iris. So, at the present, I have 4 sisters. We all are between 4 and 12 years of age. My family is unique, one, because of the 3 members of our family has a 3-sided emblem. It represents the extent of power our family possesses. Moreover, almost everyone in the gang has family members with different color eyes. We all have blue eyes, and I am only mentioning this to tell you we are all vampires. The black heart changes you into a different creature based on your eye color. Vampires have blue eyes, werewolves have hazel eyes, reapers or ghosts have green eyes, and demons have brown or black eyes. Moreover, we are the only family comprising only of females, 2 of them being twins. We have talked enough about our family. Well, I let Colleen cry with her grief of her not being able to sparkle, similar to the vampires of Twilight. She is a crybaby, although I wouldn't say I like her crying. She stood up, walked towards me, and we hugged each other. Then I asked her, "Are you happy now?" She smiled at me and nodded as she asked, "Why don't you like Twilight?" I glanced over at her and said, "It has given a bad reputation to our kind. It betrays us to be weak. I sighed as I looked down towards the ground and said, I know. So, where are Mom and Dad? Colleen looked towards the hallway and said, both of them are with Dana, Rena, and Raquel. I dropped my head and shivers ran down my spine as I asked her, what about Rena and Raquel? She looked down at the floor, let out a breath, and said, they both have high temperatures. I rubbed my hand over my face and said, sounds as if they are suffering from an infection due to the black heart. Colleen looked back at me and said, yeah. Why did Uncle Gabriel do this to us? I didn't know how to answer her question, so all I said was, to enable us to protect ourselves from our enemies. Colleen wrapped her arm around me and said, what if we weren't a part of the game? Our sisters would be strong and healthy. Then we looked towards the doorway and saw Dad and Dana standing at the entrance. With her long blonde hair and blue eyes, which once shone bright, Dana now seemed dull and lifeless. I needed to stay strong and stop myself from crying. I felt a tear escape my eyes as I wiped it away. Then Dad walked over to his recliner and sat down. He said, well, you are home earlier than expected. I looked at him and shook my head as I said, yep, thanks to Nathaniel. He spent a long time telling me about Gabriel wanting me to meet me in his office at 2 tomorrow afternoon. My father ignored what I said and asked, did you at least manage to get the heart to Gabriel? I breathed and said, no, I didn't. It stopped beating while it was still in my hand. He smiled at me and said, oh well, he still needs to pay the compensation. I rolled my eyes, ran a hand through my hair, and started pulling my hair out in frustration as I said, not as much as I would usually get. I have lost about $100,000. I could have been a millionaire. My father laughed and said, haha, it's okay. You would be able to live comfortably with what you have. I smiled at him as I nodded in agreement and said, however, can you imagine someone my age being a millionaire? He laughed again, leaned over to pick up Dana, and placed her on his lap. He said, no, you're not an average 12-year-old either. However, either way, I need to get her back to bed as soon as possible for her to be ready for the doctor's appointment. I looked over at Dana, and she smiled at me as I asked, is her condition already so bad? They had just started injecting her with it just a week ago. My father looked at me and said, "Her health is declining rapidly. I don't know what to do. Moreover, the doctor is coming tomorrow to check her." I could feel anger building up inside me when he told me, and I immediately responded, "You can't give up on them yet." He clenched his fist and jaw, tried to stop himself from being angry, and said, "I'm not. I need more options and a little more time to help them." I looked downwards and said, "I'm sorry, Dad." He took a deep breath and let it out before responding, "It's okay. You're scared. We all are." Then he got up and walked away. I was in awe of what my dad had done. He rarely raised his voice at us because we were required to deal with it during boot camp. That's what Colleen is going through, scaring us to death. We were shocked that Willow was not listening to Colleen and going against her wishes as well. The last time I saw her smile, I felt happy. Getting some joy in our fucked up lives makes me happy. At the time, she had smiled back at me. I looked at Colleen and asked, "What's so funny?" Colleen smiled at me, pointed towards her book, and said, "You and Nathaniel are similar to Bella and Edward." I laughed, shook my head in the negative, and asked how. She sat up and laughed. "Both of you want to be a couple, but you would never admit to it." I rolled my eyes as I crossed my arms over my chest and said, "You're funny. I don't want to be shot by Dad or Gabriel." She looked at me and said, "They wouldn't kill you." I raised an eyebrow and asked, "How can you be so sure?" Colleen grinned widely at me and said, "It's easy, as Gabriel thinks you're his best man, and Dad loves you a lot." I rolled my eyes and said, "Yeah, well, I don't want to be with Nathaniel." She leaned in towards me and said, "Why? He's so handsome." I pointed my finger at her and widened my eyes as I said, "I don't want to be with him, as he is handsome and desired by many girls." I looked at her eyebrows raised as I continued, "Too many girls thinks he's hot. I don't want to be with someone who every girl desires to be with." She glanced up at me, raised her finger, and said, "Oh, good point." Then I saw Dad waving at me and asking me to come, as if he wanted to talk to me about something in private. I placed a hand on her shoulder and told her I will be back to finish this conversation. She smiled and continued reading her book. I started walking towards Dad. I turned right to walk into the hallway and stood in front of my dad. I asked, "What's going on, Dad?" My father raised his eyebrow and asked, "Did you tell me about him asking you to come to his office?" I looked up at his face and said, "Yes, I know it's weird, and I feel scared, Dad. What's going on?" He started pacing around, ran a hand through his messy and short hair, and asked, "Why does he want you to come to his office?" I shrugged and said, "I don't know." Nathaniel acted as if he didn't know anything about it either. He glanced briefly at me and said, "It's bizarre of him to ask you to come there instead of sending your mission here." I looked down and bit my fingernail as I nodded in agreement. He placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Take care of yourself. He will treat you differently while you are in his territory." I looked at him as I required, "What do you mean?" He looked into my eyes as she leaned closer and said, "Do not defy him there. He will not hesitate to attack you. You still have a heart, but he might not remember it." I raised an eyebrow and whispered, "I will. Can I go back to Colleen now?" He stood up straight and nodded in the affirmative. I smiled and thanked him. Then I walked back to the living room. After sitting down, Colleen and I talked about boys for a few minutes, and then we both went to bed.